want to go back, you can look at the previous stream that I did for part 1. But honestly, I don't recommend it. I think let's just watch it from here. So far, they introduced themselves and just kind of we're talking about a bunch of random topics that we're not really getting at the core of the core disagree. I think this is a really interesting conversation. I haven't watched it yet. This is going to be my first time reacting. But the reason why I think this is so interesting is because so this is absolutely the type of background that you need to talk about existential AI risk, because as you scale up these systems, not only do you need to know the computer science side of it, but you're also going to need to know the implications of the physical limits that the universe puts on these types of systems that so far have had exponential scale. So Yudkowsky is the foremost advocate of AI, the AI doom perspective. And Stephen Wolfram is a well-respected, well-regarded computer scientist with the appropriate background to make a compelling argument against this case. And so I think we're going to get a lot from going through this. Just before we start and going into it, I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself and about my channel here. I am an engineer who founded a VC-backed company in the blockchain space, and I make content around technology and the implications that these new types of technology will have on our society going forward. So I cover a lot of AI stuff, I cover a lot of crypto stuff, and anything that's going to fundamentally reshape the way that society looks, I look at that and I try to take a contrarian stance. And the reason why I started this channel is because I didn't see enough people that were bringing this type of a perspective, and we're not, without getting too much into the technical details, and I saw there was a hole in the market of podcasts and YouTube and just basically any content. Nobody was making the content that I wanted to see. So if you like these types of discussions and you want to be exposed to new ideas in the space, please subscribe and please follow me on X, LZRS CG. And so anyway, let's dive into it. So, okay, I'm gonna start at this chapter here. So this first part, we're going to talk a bit about quantum mechanics and fundamental reality. Remember, this is Stephen Wolfram's specialty. He's written books on this. He's done a lot of research here. This is going to be an interesting introduction to the way we start talking about the core issues that are a part of this disagreement. So let's dive into it.
There's only one reality. It just runs on quantum fields, protons, neutrons, electrons, the 6 quarks. That's what's real. That's what is. I don't quite want to say universally true because I don't know what the word universal or even true adds in this case. It's what's real. It predates us looking at it. It was here and contained, and then on top of that, you've got language. This complicates the task of interpreting the words that humans utter in a way that lets them be compared. All of that is in the map rather than in the territory.
You are throwing me down my rabbit hole because I have to go. Now, this question of whether there is a unique reality and so on is it's just to give you a taste.
Yeah,
okay, and then maybe.
As I was saying, this is absolutely Stephen Wolfram's domain. So it's very brave of Yudkowsky to even venture into this territory.
But whether or not they're going to die.
Just as the disc is absolutely stalling getting to the important topics, and I don't believe that we really need to lay much foundation. I think Yudkowsky, he's done a lot more of these types of debates, and he knows enough stuff. You don't need that in order to discuss this topic. And but Stephen Wolfram really feels the need to go down all of these rabbit holes and talk on basically any tangential issue that he finds relevant.
You've thought
on top of these foundations rather than at the very bottom where we can establish common meanings for terms like, so the AI is going to kill us.
Right. So yes, it's like the Schrodinger cat. Is the cat dead or alive? And we argue about whether if the cat was replaced by an AI, but just on the rabbit hole for a minute. I mean, so you might say the mass of the electron is a definite reality fact about the world. But we even know from existing physics, existing quantum field theory, that the effective mass of an electron depends on how hard you kick it to measure that mass. So it's not the case that there's 0.511 MeV or whatever is the sort of usually stated rest mass of an electron. But the fact is, it depends. If you kick it hard enough, the effective mass will be, in the case of an electron with QED, it'll be larger than that, and so on. And with quarks, it's a much worse situation, because with quarks, if you kick them really hard, their mass will seem to be rather quite small. If you don't kick them very hard, they'll be very hard to move, and their effective mass will be larger. So even at the level of the formalism of quantum field theory, we already know that there is some dependence on kind of how you look at the mass of an up quark. Okay? There isn't really, depends on what you mean by that. It depends on, what momentum transfer.
I direct the interested reader to the quantum physics sequence, in which I try to explain how the decoherence viewpoints, they're into territory, and all of the quantum weirdness is in terms of like how we map it rather than something out there in reality itself.
All right, just
but I not go down.
Yeah, one thing that I always like to think about, especially in this conversation, is the idea of complex systems. And so AI is a complex system, and one of the issues in predicting what AI is going to do is that it's complex. And so just by looking at the individual details of the neural network, you're not necessarily going to understand what the behavior is going to be. And it's so complex that humans, like, you actually need to follow specific methodologies in order to know what a neural network is going to do. And so we'll get more into this later on in the discussion. But I mean, talking about quantum mechanics I agree with Yudkowsky here, that talking about quantum mechanics it's so many to this discussion. I mean, think of all the layers of like how there's the subatomic particles, and then there's the materials, and then there's the engineering to make the computer chips, and then there's the software layer, and you have all these layers of abstraction, and each one is at an extremely a massive scale relative to the layer below it. And each one of these are complex systems. And maybe there's some sort of philosophical perspective you can get from studying quantum physics, like, there's some uncertainty in this way, or maybe you think about probability distributions, and that could be a useful thought experiment. But realistically, I mean, at the end of the day, you might as well just be talking about Aristotle or some other philosopher, because there's not really going to be anything that quantum physics can tell you about these systems. Now, there's an argument you could make that perhaps there's some quantum mechanism needed to make a conscious AI that's intelligent and creative and stuff like that. And people have had those theories. I think, as we said in the last reaction to this, the last episode, that has pretty much been debunked. There is some quantum magic that uniquely enables intelligence that classical computers would not be able to do. So anyway, let's continue watching.
I've got to, I'm very excited about having reached, I think, the bottom of, really excited about that. And I think it's very relevant to this question about, is there one reality? It's very relevant to the question about sort of how do the AIs think about things?
It doesn't matter if there's one reality. We just want to know if the AI is going to kill us.
I think they can kill us in a classical universe. So what if we just
a question of
set aside all the quantum stuff and talk about whether or not they would kill us if we were in a classical universe? I think the question of whether or not they would kill us in a classical universe has all of the same issues as the question of whether they would kill us in a quantum universe.
Relevant for, look, the bottom line in this kind of Rouliad construct that, I've been talking about a lot last few years. It's kind of, the Rouliad is kind of this entangled limit of all possible computations. And the way I see kind of our version of reality, kind of more or less agree about the laws of physics, for example, has to do with the fact that we are minds who are not only nearby in physical space, but we're also nearby in Roulial space.
I do see what Wolfram is the line of argumentation he's going to take, and I think it's a good one. I'm not going to say this right now. Let's let him develop the argument, and we can hear it from him instead of from me. But I do see why he's saying that. I just think there might be a more direct way of doing it rather than going in and talking about quantum physics before. perhaps it would be better if he and Yudkowsky just had the surface level discussion about the risks of AI. And Yudkowsky, he should have earlier. They do need to, clash directly on these issues, and then it'd be great if then at that point Wolfram could maybe go down a rabbit hole that would.
Laws of physics. I think that just systems like AIs, they could be near us in real space, they could be far away in real space. The ones that
I want to let him verbalize his own, like he can articulate his own argument. So I'll be reacting to it maybe once he says a little bit more. I do like what he's saying though, but I definitely don't think it's rhetorically, I don't think that his approach is necessarily very. Maybe it's not that convincing. Well, let's let him develop it.
Right. Like, is real space what people believe about things, or is real space what is there?
Real space is what is there, and what people believe is their impression of. In other words, they have a certain. The observer has a certain model of what's going on. And, the laws of...
So, forgive me, they are not in a different universe with different laws of physics, because then they couldn't touch us.
Okay, I'm just going to go out and kind of give a little bit of a spoiler to what I think Stephen Wolfram is getting at. And he has a very similar viewpoint to me. And I'll say it in my way, couch it a bit more in the terms of Stephen Wolfram. So this is just going off of some statements that I've heard him make. But basically the idea is that there are limits to how much you can predict what a computation is going to do. And there is kind of like this fundamental state of any computation where there's only so much there's only so much fluff that you can take out of a computation. And there's like a minimum, in other words, there's a minimum number of steps for any given computation to which you'll not be able to predict what it will do without actually running the computation. And there's a lot of reasons why this is an important concept in computer science and in physics. But what he's getting at is several things, I think. I think part of this is that we are not going to be able to, he's not denying that you could have a robot that's controlled by AI that could kill people. And perhaps it could kill all the people in the world. Or like, let's say an AI that's not a robot, it hacks into a nuclear facility and detonates everything. Like, he is not denying that could occur. He's not even going there. That's not even on his mind right now when he's talking about these types of concepts. What I believe he's saying is that we, as a computationally limited, our minds are computational. We run computations. Everything can be thought of as a computation. The universe could actually be thought of as a computation. But our consciousness is running a computation. And when we try to predict what an AI is going to do, and we don't have nearly enough information or computational power to know what an AI is going to do. So to say, oh, this AI is going to kill us is kind of an issue of pretend. It's almost like an impossible thing to know, because he has good reason to believe, and just take my word for this, there is good reason to believe this, that you couldn't know this without without spending a lot of computational energy on calculating it. So that's kind of part of what he's saying. And I think the other part that he's getting at, and the reason why I'm saying this is based on some of the stuff he said in the last reaction video that I did to this debate. His opinion to values that are not aligned with human values, he grants that, but he thinks that there's almost, I wouldn't say infinite, but it's an astronomically large number of things that a computation could do. And he thinks it's going to be basically, out of all the things that humans would do and all the things that AIs would do, there's not going to be that much overlap. And killing all humans is just probably going to be a very low probability out of all the things that the AI could do. And I think one of the reasons that he's saying that is he's relating it to this rulal space, or however he calls it, which is basically all the different paths that the AI's computation could take. And basically, he thinks that it will do a lot of things and a lot of things that we just won't care about. But it is possible, yes, it is possible that it could kill everybody. Very low number of them will actually be the AI choosing to do things that kill all of humanity. Maybe the AI really wants to count and or mining Bitcoin. Like there's so many things. I'm of course giving things that humans like to do, so these are all bad examples. But just like there's natural processes occurring everywhere. In my backyard, there's some natural process of something happening. This is not something that we humans think about, but it's happening nonetheless. Basically an unaligned AI is probably going to be just doing all these computations that are irrelevant. And I think there will. I think just to be clear, Yudkowsky he absolutely has a counter argument to this point. They haven't gotten to that, but he does have a response. I tend to side with Stephen Wolfram, and I have reasons why I don't find that counter argument to be satisfactory. But this is not something that Yudkowsky has not considered. So hopefully they have that conversation, and he can make that argument pretty soon.
Well, let me just point out why an AI might have different laws of physics. Okay, so take some of the standard laws of physics, like the second law of thermodynamics.
Sorry, laws of physics in the map or the territory?
I'm not sure what's map, what's territory.
Like, does the AI have a different model of physics, or does it act according to different physical laws?
From our point of view, it has electrons doing all the things that we expect electrons to do.
Okay.
But its impression of what's going on might be very different. So, a couple of examples.
And again, I think this is not a super productive tangent. We'll see how he uses this tangent. But I still think, regardless of whether they have the AI has electrons or not, or whatever he's going to argue, it's different about the laws of physics. Come on, like the AI could kill us. I mean, you could already presumably have an AI that kills us. ChatGPT, if they put it in charge of some military technology, could kill people. So it's possible for AI to kill us no matter what kind of physics it's using. But anyway, let's go down the rabbit hole. It's interesting.
So, for example, let's talk about that we say that effectively they have higher entropy. That principle, that idea, that fundamental law of physics is a consequence of the way that we observe those gas molecules. Those gas molecules, they bounce around, they do what they do. The fact that we say, oh, they're just going to this random configuration is a consequence of the fact that we can't decode the actual motions of those gas molecules. We can imagine a computational system that could.
So there's
okay, but yeah, I mean, we can let him respond, and I'm sure he's going to say something good to this. But I don't think that that's a particularly compelling argument, and I'm not a physicist, so maybe I'm speaking out of place here. But that would be based on basically the computational ability and perhaps some of the information available to the AI. It doesn't actually reduce this idea of entropy. Is he saying that observing large amounts of molecules and tracking their position and has enough computational power to simulate it, and it has the information necessary to model gas particle behavior, which is totally plausible. I think humans can do that too on a small scale. So, I mean, there's some serious, I don't know. I'd be very interested in what experimental physicists are able to do in terms of this. It definitely seems like a very hard problem, but it's not my area of expertise. But let's see what Yud says.
Like a territory level fact that is like true, that is a consequence of the laws of physics treated as axioms, which is that if we selected a volume of possible initial states, that volume of initial states develops into an at least equally large volume of, and theorem as a consequence of it. The fact that we don't know where in this volume the system starts means that our volume of uncertainty doesn't get any smaller without observing it. And this is the fact in the territory that makes the fact in the map true, where entropy goes up from.
So the idea is that the territory is reality and the map is our interpretation. So someone can have an interpretation of the territory, or at least maybe it could be either incorrect or it could be just an abstract representation. Like you can draw the river in a certain place, And that may accurately depict that there's a river there, but does it capture 100% of the essence? No, it's an abstraction because we like to think about rivers. So that's what he means by the map of the territory. And he's basically, so the question he's asking Stephen Wolfram is, okay, when you're saying that the AI is going to have different physics, what you're saying, he's basically asking, is it the map or the territory? Meaning, is the fundamental reality, are there fundamentally less, is there somehow in some sort of parallel system where it actually is able to do things that humans fundamentally can't do based on the way that reality is? Or is it based off of just simply how it interprets it? And in this case, I wonder if, yeah, well, let's hear what he has to say about entropy. But I think, again, entropy is, in the sense, a phenomena based on like the computational power of the observer, along with, I mean, other things. I like information and like the ability to observe. I'm not sure all the factors that would go into entropy, but it seems to me, but I think it is in some sense clear that entropy, in the sense of, um, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess that's an interesting question. If entropy is a law of the universe outright, or if it is just something where you're losing track of your knowledge of the different states. Because one thing that, and again, I'm not a physicist, but one thing that is true is that it seems like you put gas in a box, as an example, and um, the molecules are going to be spread evenly, and as opposed to being kind of clustered into one corner, and that would be, and not only are you as the observer losing track of where those molecules are, which is kind of Stephen Wolfram's perspective, it also seems like different potential energy in the system because everything is evenly distributed, and therefore there's it has certain properties on a macro level that are different than its initial. So I don't know if that's also considered to be high entropy or not. Let's hear what they have to say about it.
From our viewpoint on it, our beliefs, but there's an underlying way the universe is. A different universe might not obey the second law of thermodynamics if if you could have lots of different initial states develop into the same end state.
No, I mean, let's just assume that the microscopic laws of physics are reversible. So, so the things bounce like billiard balls, like perfect billiard balls. And, we'd have we make a movie of what happens in the forward. We say, this is what happens if you run it forwards in time. And, if we ran it backwards in time, then that movie would be equally valid at the level of individual collisions.
Yep.
But the fact that we believe in the second law of thermodynamics, that we believe orderly configurations end up in disordered states, those states that they end up in are not, in some fundamental sense, in your territory sense, those are not disordered. They are only disordered with respect to our perception of them. In other words, there is a perfectly reasonable...
So it's interesting. I'm not going to be able to correct him here. And I was kind of going down the route of what he was saying. And then you might have sensed some hesitation, and I was trying to couch my language when I was talking about this subject. There is a difference between entropy in the physical world, like physics entropy, and information theory. And these are two separate concepts that have weirdly similar parallels. But I think it was Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, who discovered this idea of entropy. Von Neumann, who's a brilliant genius, computer scientist, mathematician. And he said, what should I call this? And he said, call this entropy. But what it really is it's not that. So there's this idea of entropy in physics that already existed based on when people were studying the dynamics of gas, like for steam engines and stuff like that. And there was this pre-existing idea. And then when studying information, entropy has to do with how much information is unknown in the context of communication, let's say. But the math behind it is so similar to the math behind physical entropy. And so anyway, for whatever reason, they saw a parallel and they both named both of these things entropy. But they're not the same concept, and you can get into trouble when you try to make this analogy. And I'm sure Stephen Wolfram knows this subject very well, and I don't think he's making a mistake. But to me, it sounds like when he's saying that entropy is purely a fact of measuring, of like the uncertainty of knowing the positions of the particles. That was what I was thinking, that made sense on a surface level, but that more comes from the information theory side, where uncertainty is the definition of entropy. And I don't know if that's necessarily, if that holds up in like a normal physics understanding of entropy, but probably a lot of his work is relating these two concepts. So yeah, let's continue listening.
Oh, I can tell that it came from that very simple initial state.
I agree in a classical universe. With the quantum universe, there's a couple of caveats about like how you might need to run both quantum branches backward in order for them to reunite and restore the starting state. But
Okay,
you know,
okay.
classical universes are all we care about anyways, I hope.
In our model of physics, that's very well understood in terms of this whole story of multi-way graphs and branchial graphs and so on. But as
Yeah, and Stephen Wolfram does have, he has this kind of grand theory that captures all of these ideas, that he has worked on with a lot of other very smart people. So I'm sure that this has an internal consistency, especially if we're diving into all of his work. And I think that might be a really cool subject of a video, because I know there's some brilliant researchers that work with him, and I have seen some interviews, so maybe I could react to some of those interviews in the future, and as well as some of the other interviews where Stephen Wolfram dives into his work.
Okay, I propose that by like 5 minutes from now, according to my watch, we have to go back to talking about whether or not AIs kill each other, kill everyone.
Right. Okay, all right. But anyway, just to finish on this point about whether, so my point is, something which can do all those computations and can sense all those molecules won't believe in the second law of thermodynamics. To give another example that's even more direct, imagine you thought a million times faster than you do. When you look around the room, you are receiving photons that get to you within a microsecond. Your brain right now thinks about them in milliseconds. So as far as your brain is concerned, there is an instantaneous state of space that progresses through successive moments of time. If you were to think a million times faster than you do, I'm not sure you would believe in space. I think space would be some kind of construct that you could imagine constructing, but it would not be the natural thing for you to think about.
That's really interesting. I wonder if that is an argument related to the speed of light, or not. But anyway, I'm just going to continue listening.
Because the fact that we think of a state of space is a consequence of kind of our scale and so on. And by the way, for an AI, or computer that happens to have silicon that runs a million times faster than our brains, that won't be the natural thing that won't be the natural construct for such a system.
Because they'll live in Minkowskian space-time instead of Euclidean space-time?
No, just because of the scale of brains, on the scale of physical scale and the speed of light, the light from what we see around us is arriving sufficiently quickly that we have accumulated all the photons from all around us before we think about how things might have changed. And so we're kind of taking in gulps, sort of all of space at a particular moment in time. And then we say, and the next moment in time, sort of all of it being us rather than silicon-based computational systems. So it's just an example of how sort of the reality and the way that one can...
So the part where...
Yeah, shapes, or go 5-dimension, perfect image, because you can't actually see in 4 dimensions, but they have a good representation. And as you start increasing the dimensionality, it gets harder and harder to visualize. And that's just because there is a natural way that we tend to look at things. It doesn't mean that these shapes don't exist and are not valid. In fact, high dimensional shapes are extremely useful in physics and in computer science and in AI and all these things. So, similarly, like there is a implicit bias that's in our minds, that we're just built to think a certain way, and it's really hard to imagine more of how it's modeling reality. This conversation a bit more. So let's keep listening.
Reality at a finer level. The world we see around us now is, we don't see electrons. We don't see protons. There's actually like what goes on in your cerebellum right now. And if I was like much, much smarter, I might have a whole bunch of hypotheses about which neurons in you are firing. These are facts at a finer level of granularity than I can afford to keep track of given the computational power that I do have.
Yeah, and I think the other thing though, like to keep in mind is you probably wouldn't, just to be honest, there's very few examples of even of being able to do something like that. And one of the reasons is you wouldn't be able to do it the other way. So regardless of whether you know the details of what's going on in a certain neuron, based off of some sort of macro condition, if you knew which neurons were firing in the first place, and then you were trying to predict the macro condition, you probably wouldn't be able to. And so in both cases, I mean, this is an example of a complex system. And to know what this complex system is going to do by looking at do like statistics in order to predict what these types of complex systems do at a macro level. So, like for example, when you're studying neuroscience, you're prodding a certain point of the brain, doing a bunch of things, stimulating it, taking it out, doing all this stuff, and then you're recording what happens at a macro level. And that's how you start to understand, like, this is where certain neural circuits are. And so again, in order to predict what an AI is going to do, similarly, we're going to need to actually have the scientific method. You cannot deduce this logically. There's no way that you can infer this. And I know there's arguments against that. I'm hoping to hear them say that. I'm hoping to hear Yudkowsky give his reason for why he thinks he can logically predict that AI is going to kill us without having any evidence for that. And then at that point, we'll dive further into that discussion.
So I do agree that, probably as you get smarter, you end up modeling aspects of reality that don't easily fit into the sensory modalities we have right now. You probably have
I'm not sure about smarter, just different. I mean, I don't know whether even the critters of the earth, if one could find from them what their physics is, things where olfaction is the primary sense and so on. So obvious that
if you're better at predicting everything that a human can predict than a human, then I would call you better at prediction than the human, rather than qualifying it by.
Well, so the question of what you predict, I mean, there's also a question of, do you predict the position of every atom? Okay, computational irreducibility is going to get in the way of that. That's not going to work. So you have to say, I'm going to pick these things that I'm really good at predicting. I can't predict everything, because if I try to predict everything, I run into computational irreducibility. So I'm going to predict certain things. There are certain things that we as humans care about predicting.
And just to clarify that, I believe what he means by that is that there are things that there's no heuristic to know what's going to happen. There's actually, again, as I had mentioned earlier in the stream, there is a minimum number of computational steps that you're going to need everything that's going to happen, unless you need to have a universe-sized simulation about what the implications of his theory are there, but that does seem to be what he means based on what he was explaining earlier.
And, like the overall motion of the gas, not the individual molecules and so on. There are other things that we as humans don't seem to care much about predicting. So the question you might ask is, perhaps the thing to ask is, if you are trying to predict the things that we humans care about, given that we can't predict everything, you're going to pick a certain set of things to predict that you, as the entity, whether human or AI, in some sense care about, whatever it means for the AI to care about something. So I'm not sure quite where we're going with that. I think we've agreed to go back to will the AIs kill us?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Thank you.
I was going to interject there because I would really love Eliezer just to have a really good crack at this. So Eliezer, if you wouldn't mind, could you just give us a step-by-step argument for doom, basically, with plausible inferences?
Okay. Thank you. Because I thought he was going to have him go down another rabbit hole instead of actually talking about the debate at hand. So let's do it.
And premises and evidence. Can you spend a bit of time laying it out and then let Stephen respond?
Recently, running on Twitter across somebody who was like, explain to me how the AI does anything in the physical world. How does it do anything at all? To him, it was the law of the universe that the chatbots and so on just couldn't reach out and touch the physical world. That to him was how the world worked, and they are connected to the internet. You can take an open source large language model and let it send emails. The current chatbots can't send emails, but you could.
I think we all agree that AIs can be connected to things that actuate in the world, either actuate by having actual machines do things, or actuate by convincing humans to do things. I would certainly agree that
this is not a hard step for you, but it's a hard step for probably some viewers right now, and other people with different hard steps. Some people, the question is, why does it trade with us? From my perspective, there's a kind of straightforward story here where it builds more powerful tech, where the more technical a conversation you want to have and can be built in not that long of a time, and then it has more powerful actuators in the physical world. It has the equivalent of guns to the Native Americans, and then it kills us once it already has its own factory infrastructure.
So let's perhaps the most useful thing would be to go through some steps where, like the actuation in the real world, that's not a hard step for me. I'm there. Okay. So let's keep going after that. So so the AI.
This is such a hard conversation to have. I think almost you want to just flip this on its head and have even though it's not really appropriate, like the person claiming doom, Yudkowsky, just respond to this. I don't believe that we have an AI doom scenario, and here's why. AI is a complex system. We cannot predict what it's going to do. There are many paths, computational paths that it can take, and we simply do not have the tool set to predict what those paths are. Now, is going to kill everybody. I mean, it's not to say that it couldn't be one of the paths, but there's no reason to believe that it would necessarily do that. It could do all kinds of things that do not kill humans, and you need to make the argument that it will choose to specifically kill humans with a high % certainty. Otherwise, the default assumption is that's a near zero probability. And I think if he just did it that way, I think it would just cut to the chase, and where he can explain why he believes the behavior is going to converge on killing everybody. And then, as a counter argument, we talk about how we can predict that that's true. And my view is that you cannot logically deduce that. You need evidence to show that that's likely, which we don't have.
Right now, there's a question: do AIs have freedom of thought? Right now,
I don't think I have freedom of thought. I just think whatever I do think. I'm not free to think anything other than the things that I think. I just think whatever I do think. But
you're not constrained in what I mean. The way the world is set up, there aren't electrodes sticking into your brain that as soon as you start to form some particular thought, they shock you and prevent you from having that thought.
There's no need for those electrodes. I'll only end up thinking whatever it is I actually end up thinking. But I agree that there aren't, visible physical electrodes like that attached to me right now. Social electrodes, we've all got those.
Yes. What's actually going on inside the AIs, which I think is somewhat important, because it's a question of whether, how aligned are they with what's going on inside.
Question. Basically lay out the argument, and I mean, it did seem like Yudkowsky was basically dodging that, I'm going to be honest. But then Stephen Wolfram is adding fuel to the fire by just creating more rabbit holes about things that are not the argument. I mean, I really wish this was not posed as a conversation, and this was more of a debate. And there was kind of like a winner and loser, because he needs to kind of be on Stephen Wolfram needs to be on the rhetorical offensive. And even if you're watching this and you don't like Stephen Wolfram, you want to see the ideas clash, and they're just not doing it. And so it would be great if he really was like kind of baiting him and saying, hey, give me the argument. I don't need to prove that they won't kill us. You need to prove that they will kill us. The default assumption is that nothing is going to change, and you need to prove that it will, and really force him to lay out this argument.
Humans and so on. And I don't know. I don't know whether that's important to your argument, but we can go.
Random is not scary. I mean, that was going to be my response to you way back when you talked about machines being smarter than you, or cellular automata being smarter than you because you can't predict them without
I'm glad that he was saying this. Random is not scary. This is something I was talking about last time. And what I would argue is, from our perspective, the kind of the null hypothesis of this whole thing is that effectively the actions of an AI are random. And why do I say that? It's because it's unpredictable, and unpredictable is roughly equivalent to, okay, well, you say, okay, you study it, you do a statistical analysis, you gather the data, and then you show this is what it would have randomly done in this kind of control case, or what would be how consistently the data. So any claim, he has no evidence to show what the behavior is going to be, and so I don't think that he's able to reliably make such claims. So it's interesting. Anyway, as I was saying, it's interesting that he's saying random's not scary, when actually we should think of what an AI is going to do as effectively random, because we can't predict it and we have no reason to be able to predict it. So from our perspective, it is random.
Going through all the steps, you can take an unpredictable cellular automaton like that and hook it up to play chess, and it'll lose to you and it'll lose to stockfish. Like the stuff that is.
Okay, this is going to get good. He's talking about chess. So this is an important part of the conversation, because AI is very good at chess. Stockfish is very good at chess. It's superhuman. It beats people all the time, and so hopefully we don't have an AI that beats people in living, taking all their molecules or whatever. So let's continue listening to this. This is going to get really interesting.
Is predicting which actions are needed to get to which end states is the dangerous stuff. That's the stuff that is predicting what happens next, predicting the next observation, predicting the facts behind the observations, figuring out.
I mean, in other words, the cellular automaton is doing what it does. We have a hard time predicting it. But we don't happen to, because if that cellular automaton, so for example, there are cellular automaton models for road traffic flow. Okay. It's kind of a
You have used up all of your rabbit holes. You have no rabbit holes left.
Yes.
Continue.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Let's. We're.
I love you, Stephen Wolfram, but
the rabbits have been all the rabbits. What was it? Myxomatosis, right? Was that? No, that was the
Ben. It doesn't matter what exactly happened to the rabbits. They're just gone. Okay. Nobody knows what happened to them, and it doesn't matter.
Okay, all right. So we're actuating in the world, and the AI. Go on. What?
Sorry, that was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. That was amazing. I think Yudkowsky wins this debate.
What happens next?
So, do you want me to talk about?
I don't know what it even means to. I mean, how do you tell what the motivation of an AI is?
So, if, for example,
I don't think we know what a human motivation is either. We can't. I suppose we deduce by induction some human motivations by.
I don't think we deduce by induction. The way we know human motivations is in two ways. And I talked about this last time. One, we run studies on human behavior and psychology, which, by the way, it's a failed field. Look up the reproducibility crisis or replicatability crisis. Reproducibility crisis in psychology. It doesn't work. It's a bunch of pseudoscience. But there's some legitimate things where we can say this is a trend in human behavior. And it's a real, there's some things we can do, and we do that with statistics. And because humans are complex systems and we can't predict them without running statistics and actually, doing the studies and gathering evidence. Otherwise, we don't know what humans are going to do. And you might say, well, we have an intuition. That person looked mad and then he punched the wall and I knew he was good. Statistics, and those that were more able to predict survived and those that were less able to predict did not survive. So over time, the theory of mind that was inbuilt into our mind that we didn't have to learn, it developed to be highly accurate. But this is still a statistical kind of like optimization problem of like searching for a predictable theory. It's similar to what science does. So either way, you don't logically know what humans' motivations are. You're not inducing it. This is absolutely incorrect statement. It is statistical, and we learned it. It could, because again, if we open someone's brain, there's very little that we can know. And if we just poke it, we don't know what that's going to do. And we can get some ideas after doing lots of experiments and recording lots of trends. But in general, a priori, we don't know. And it's very hard to predict. It's very complicated and complex. And so, again, it's not induced. There's no induction. We learn it, it's statistical. And so we need evidence. Since we can't predict AI, there's nothing in AI that evolutionarily was created in our minds to know what AI is going to do. Like we don't have like a evolutionary model of the transformer architecture and what that does as it scales. We have no intuition on that. So we need to literally study it scientifically, meaning see what this behavior is and gather evidence. It's the only way that we can know what it's going to do. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the only way, but you can have something similar and you can establish some sort of causal link between these two things where one predicts the other. And if you're able to do that, perhaps you can reason in some ways about one thing that's more understandable and apply that to the thing that's less understandable. But again, that's very tricky, and you still need to do studies and bring evidence, and you cannot do it logically. But what I will say, and I think this is a good time to introduce this type of idea, is that we do have these. This is one of the things that we've gained evolutionarily. And if you look around the world, you see that a huge percentage of people are religious, currently and historically. It's a phenomenon that is not just, it's absolutely pervasive and in human history. And you might think, well, maybe because, religion is true, and therefore that's why, because they just saw all the evidence for this religion in their time and place. And I think that's fair. But again, when you dive into it, maybe you think there's not a lot of evidence for this, and yet people still believe it. And so no matter how you slice it, there seems to be some phenomena whereby people are religious. And that is part of our brain. Our brain is oriented naturally to be religious. And it's a socializing force, and you can come up with a whole theory for why evolution made our brains religious. Or you could say God created us, and God made us to are very religious thing that people sometimes do. It's a thing that sticks. And you can have like the idea that it's a meme or whatever. Either way, there's something to this. There's an opening for the meme to convince people to be religious. So, okay, people are religious. Why? Why are people religious? Well, there are several reasons why evolutionary psychologists believe that people are religious. And one of these things is this idea of agency detection, just from the top. There's something on the tree and it fell down or whatever. That's true. But there is a bias that we have in our mind to assume that it was a living thing, like a predator. And we detect that, even assume that something is akin to another human or an animal that's closely related to us biologically. And so this is a type of bias that humans have, that we are, we are likely to believe that there is anything, like we're likely to ascribe agency of a human-like agency to different things. And we do that because it has helped us survive. Or you can say that it was something that, God gave to us. Either way. But let's just for the sake of argument, since we're kind of coming at this from an academic angle, they usually don't bring religion into this. So let's just talk about it scientifically, and we just know that it could work religiously if you are religious. So there's this agency detection. This is a thing where it's just, you just always think, what was that? Who was that? Was it an animal? Like, was it a predator? It's the way that humans naturally think. Like think about, you wake up in the middle of the night and you see a shadow and you think it looks like a person. And then you turn on the lights and it was just your towel hanging on the door or something like that. So it's just a common thing. It's a common thing. And so, okay, and then what's the other thing? Well, there's how humans communicate, and this is how humans relate to each other. It's a very important thing because humans are a social animal, and together we come together and we do things together, and we achieve way more together than we do when we're apart. And the way we do this is that we we have a theory of what other people are thinking. So I know that, like, if I'm explaining this to you and you're looking away, you might be uninterested, and I have these ideas, or maybe something else is on your mind. I can intuit these things, and these concepts make sense to me because I have a theory of mind. And when you have this theory of mind, which is very important, and this hyperactive agency detection, which is also super important, you have these two things. These are the necessary psychological ingredients to support religion. And so, like, you can kind of think of, like, okay, there's when there's a storm coming, now what you're doing is you're thinking that this thing has agency, like there's some sort of agentic logic behind the storm. And then you personify it, you have a theory of mind that you map onto that agent. And that you kind of come up with like a storm god. And you can kind of, we can talk more about like this. This is an interesting thing. You can look up just the science of religion or something like that, and Google that. You'll come across this type of content. It's very interesting. But what I know, agency, we have mind on it, and we say, oh, it's going to want to kill. We the types of computations that this thing is going to do, and there are very good fundamental limits of computational irreducibility where